The gate agent was calling final boarding for our flight to Vancouver when my phone lit up with a photo my sister-in-law had posted to her Instagram story. 14 people crammed into a hospital waiting room, balloons. My mother-in-law in the front row with her hands pressed together like she was at church. The caption said, "Family grows today. So blessed." I stood there at the gate with my daughter holding my left hand and my son asleep against my shoulder, and I thought, they moved faster than I expected. The ink on my divorce papers wasn't even dry. I put my phone face down in my coat pocket and walked onto the plane. Let me back up, because the balloons in the hospital waiting room make more sense once you understand what the last 4 years of my life actually looked like. I met my ex-husband at a work conference in Toronto. I was 26 doing freelance accounting contracts while I built up my credentials. He was 31, charming in that specific way that feels like being chosen. The way he'd lock eyes with you across a room and make you feel like everyone else had just disappeared. His name doesn't matter much to this story, so I'll call him what he eventually became to me, my ex. We dated for 8 months, got engaged, got married in a small ceremony in Muskoka because his mother insisted on the Lakeview, and within 2 years I had a daughter and then a son 18 months after that. I want to be honest about who I was in that marriage because I think it matters. I was not a perfect wife. I worked too many evenings. I got anxious about money even when we had enough. I sometimes shut down in arguments instead of talking things through. I know my own flaws, but I also stayed up 3 nights straight when my ex launched his first company and couldn't make payroll. I did the books myself, off the clock, because hiring an accountant would have pushed us into the red. I brought in a second income during the years his business was inconsistent. I handled everything at home, not because I was told to, but because I genuinely believed we were building something together, and I was willing to carry more weight in the short term so we could both stand on solid ground eventually. The business grew, we hired staff, he started attending more industry events, which I thought was great. We had 2 kids under 4. I was tired in the way only parents of small children understand. That particular exhaustion where you can't remember the last time you chose what to watch on television or finished a meal while it was still warm. I found out about her the way a lot of women find out, a text notification that popped up on the counter while he was in the shower. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious, not consciously, or maybe I'd been and had been explaining it away so successfully that I'd convinced myself everything was fine. Her name was in his phone under a nickname, the kind of nickname you give someone when you're being deliberately casual. The message was not casual. I sat down on the kitchen floor. My daughter was in the next room watching cartoons. I could hear the theme song playing through the baby monitor I still kept on the counter out of habit. When he came out of the shower, I was still sitting there. I showed him the phone. He didn't deny it. That, weirdly, was the part that broke something open in me. The fact that he didn't even try. He said it had been going on for 8 months. He said he was sorry, but he also said he hadn't been happy for a long time, which is the kind of sentence that's designed to transfer blame without technically being an accusation. I asked him if he wanted to end the marriage. He said he didn't know. I told him he had a week to figure it out because I was not going to live inside that particular uncertainty. He moved into the guest room. I went through the motions of our life, school pickups, grocery runs, bath time, with this strange hollow feeling like I was operating myself from a slight distance. 3 days later, he told me he wanted a divorce. I called a lawyer the next morning. What followed was several months of the most grinding, low-grade, miserable negotiation of my adult life, not because it was hostile. There was something almost worse about the fact that it was civil. We sat across from each other in a mediator's office in Mississauga and divided up our life into line items: the house, the savings, the business, in which I was a minority shareholder because we'd structured it that way to simplify taxes, which I deeply regretted at that table. His lawyer was better prepared than mine on the business valuation. I took less than I probably should have because I wanted it to be over. The thing about divorce when you have small children is that you can't actually let it be completely over. There's always a handoff, always a schedule, always a communication thread that keeps you tethered to a person you're trying to unhook from. My ex was not a bad father in a practical sense. He showed up for his parenting time. He bought the kids what they needed. He was just someone who had made me feel, slowly and then all at once, that I was not quite enough, and now I had to see him every other week across a driveway. About 4 months after the divorce was finalized, his mother called me. She and I had never been close in the way I'd hoped when I first joined the family. She was polite, dutiful, the kind of woman who expressed care through organizing. She'd arrive at your house and immediately start rearranging your cupboards, which I found more invasive than helpful. But she'd never been unkind to me. I thought she called to check on the children. She did ask about the children, and then she said, almost as an aside, that she was really hoping for a grandson this time. She caught herself and added, "Not that your kids aren't wonderful, but the damage was done. This time, like there was an established history of trying. Like my son, who was 2.5 and had her exact nose and her laugh did not count." I didn't say anything. I said something neutral like, "I'm sure everything will work out." I got off the phone and stood in my kitchen and felt something shift in me. She had a grandson. She already had a grandson. My son was her grandson. Unless, and this is where my mind went, not because I wanted it to, unless she had already decided that those grandchildren, mine and my ex-husband's, were somehow not the right kind, not the heirs she'd had in mind. His family was not wealthy in the old money sense, but his father had built a commercial real estate portfolio over 30 years, and there is a significant estate that the family talked about in that pointed, careful way that means everyone is thinking about it and no one is supposed to say so directly. I had always found these conversations slightly uncomfortable, but had never fully understood why until that phone call. I started paying attention differently after that. His girlfriend, the woman he'd been seeing for 8 months before the divorce, was pregnant. I heard this through a mutual friend who delivered the information with that particular mixture of sympathy and guilty interest that people have when they're telling you something awful they couldn't quite keep to themselves. She was due in the spring. My ex-husband had a son. My son was 2 years old and already knew how to ask for what he wanted in full sentences and could identify every vehicle on a Canadian highway by make. He existed. He was real and present and astonishing and had a name on a birth certificate and a father who had chosen him as recently as last week when he showed up for the parenting handoff with a new dinosaur book. And yet, his family was gathering at the hospital to hear the ultrasound results for a woman my ex had known for less than a year. Balloons. 14 people. My mother-in-law in the front row. I know what you're thinking, because I thought it too. Why? He had a son. He had a daughter. If the family estate and its careful planning were the issue, Liam, my son, was right there. Was perfectly eligible. Was, in fact, the firstborn grandson. I came to understand, slowly and then with a clarity that made me feel slightly sick, that the answer had to do with me, not the children, me. His family had never fully embraced the marriage, and the divorce had given them permission to act on that retroactively. If the children were mine, they were, I don't have a clean way to say this, less his in their accounting. The new girlfriend was a kind of reset, a chance to get it right, whatever right meant to them. It was the most extraordinary thing anyone had ever communicated to me without saying a single direct word. I had been in Vancouver the previous autumn for a friend's wedding and had fallen in love with the city in a way I hadn't expected. I had grown up outside of Hamilton and had lived in the Greater Toronto area my whole adult life, and the mountains had done something to me, not in a dramatic way, more like a door I hadn't known was there had opened slightly. I had a job offer I'd been sitting on for 6 weeks. A firm in Vancouver, mid-size, good reputation, needed someone with my combination of forensic accounting experience and small business background. The salary was competitive. They'd been patient while I made up my mind. Relocating with children when you share custody is legally complicated in Canada. There are rules. You cannot simply move a child across the country without the other parent's consent or a court order, and I knew this, and I had spent 3 sessions with my lawyer working through exactly what an application to the court might look like and what my realistic chances were. My ex surprised me. When I told him about Vancouver, carefully with the full legal documentation prepared, expecting resistance, he was quiet for a long moment and then said, "The kids would like it there." He agreed to a revised schedule, longer stretches in Vancouver during the school year, extended visits in Ontario over summers and school holidays, flexible around special occasions. His lawyer in mind documented everything properly. I think he felt guilty. I think the balloon and waiting room situation had reached him in some way that his ordinary daily choices hadn't. Or maybe he just knew, somewhere underneath everything, that I'd earned the exit. I booked the flights for a Thursday. The divorce had been finalized on a Monday. I know the optics on the timing. People have opinions about mothers who move their children. But my daughter had already said goodbye to her friends, and my son had spent 2 weeks asking about the mountains. And I was not going to stay in a city where I drove past my ex-mother-in-law at the Loblaws and watched her make a split-second calculation about whether to acknowledge me. The hospital situation, by the way, did not go the way the balloon suggested it would. I know this because news travels and people who were in that waiting room eventually talked to people who talk to people, as they always do. My lawyer called me 6 weeks after we landed in Vancouver, not about the custody arrangement, but because a financial matter had surfaced that I hadn't known to look for. When my ex and I had structured the business, we had set up a holding company as part of the arrangement. At the time, I'd been a 28-year-old new mother trying to keep two income streams running simultaneously, and I had trusted his accountant's recommendations more than I should have. What I had not known, or more precisely, what I had not examined closely enough at the time of the divorce settlement, was that there was a second layer to the structure, a numbered company that held a property in Oakville. The property had been purchased using a combination of corporate funds and what appeared on the surface to be a personal loan. The loan documentation, when my lawyer's forensic accountant pulled it apart, was thin. The CRA had been looking at the business for unrelated reasons, a routine audit that had escalated, and the Oakville property had become a significant point of interest. I had signed off on the original shareholder agreement, but I had not been a signing officer on the numbered company. My lawyer had caught this during the divorce proceedings, but it had been treated as a minor structural detail. It turned out not to be minor. The short version, the divorce settlement had inadvertently protected me. Because I was not a signing officer and because my minority shares had been bought out as part of the settlement, I had no exposure to what the CRA was now describing as a failure to properly account for a corporate asset. My ex, as the sole remaining director, had full exposure. The assessment came through in the fall. It was not a small number. There were penalties on top of the tax liability, and there was the question of the Oakville property's disposition, which was tied up in a dispute that his lawyers would be managing for what appeared to be the foreseeable future. His business had also, by that point, lost its two anchor clients, a fact I only knew because one of those clients was a company I'd done contract work for years earlier, and someone there emailed me to say they were looking for a new accountant if I was ever back in Ontario. I wasn't going back to Ontario, I told them, but thank you. The girlfriend's ultrasound, I heard, had revealed a due date that didn't align with when she and my ex had said they started seeing each other. He'd requested a DNA test, which she had initially resisted. I don't know the full story, and I have no desire to speculate, but the 14 people in the waiting room with the balloons did not, apparently, get the announcement they had come for. His mother called me once more, around that time. The call was short. She asked how the children were settling in Vancouver. I told her they were doing well. She said she hoped to see them at Christmas if the visit schedule allowed. I said I would check the calendar and have my ex coordinate with her directly. I kept my voice level and kind because those are my children's grandparents, and they will always be that. And whatever I feel about the waiting room and the balloons and the phone call about this time, I am not going to be the person who uses my children's relationships as leverage. But I did not call her back. I let their father manage that relationship. That felt like the right placement of a boundary. My daughter started 3rd grade at a school 8 blocks from our apartment in East Vancouver. She made a best friend within 2 weeks. A girl who lives in the building next door and whose mother and I now have standing Thursday coffee plans. My son learned to say the mountains as a landmark the way Ontario kids say the mall. He asks periodically when we are going to see his dad, and I tell him the date, and he nods and goes back to whatever he was doing, and I am grateful every single time for how uncomplicated he makes it. I took the job. I'm good at it. I have an office with a window that faces north, and on clear days you can see the mountains from my desk, and I think about that sometimes, about how different it looks from here than from a highway in Mississauga. My ex is managing the CRA situation, as far as I know. He sees the kids on the schedule we agreed to, and he is, as I said, not a bad father in a practical sense. What he is or isn't to the woman who came after me is not my business, and I work at keeping it that way. The thing I think about most is not the affair or the divorce or even the hospital waiting room, though I still feel something sharp when that image comes back to me. What I think about most is the version of myself who sat on the kitchen floor listening to a children's cartoon through a baby monitor and thought that something in her life had irreversibly broken. It hadn't broken. It had just reached the end of a particular shape, and a different shape was available if I was willing to pick up and walk toward it. I was willing. Some mornings, I wake up early enough to catch the light coming over the mountains before the kids get up, and I make coffee and stand at the kitchen window and think, I built this, not the mountains, but this. The quiet, the view, the feeling of standing in a life that actually fits. I didn't need 14 people in a waiting room to tell me I was worth something. I already knew. I keep coming back to that image of my mother-in-law in the front row of a hospital waiting room, hands pressed together, waiting for news about a baby that wasn't her grandchild yet, while two actual grandchildren were at an airport gate 2 provinces away, holding my hands. There's no cosmic scoreboard that arranged what happened next. The CRA audit, the Oakville property, the due date that didn't add up, none of that was punishment handed down from somewhere. It was just the natural consequence of decisions made carelessly over time by people who believed they were too comfortable to be accountable. That's how it usually works. Not dramatically, not immediately, just, eventually, the math catches up. What I've learned about integrity is that it mostly goes unwitnessed. Nobody saw me doing my ex-husband's payroll at 2 in the morning when his first company couldn't make its numbers. Nobody tracked how many dinners I covered, how many invoices I reconciled, how many times I chose the marriage over the easier path. I didn't do those things to be seen. I did them because I genuinely believed in what we were building. That belief turned out to be misplaced, but the character I built in the process of holding it, that stayed with me. You can lose a marriage, a house, a city. You don't lose who you are when things get hard. The thing about clarity is that it doesn't arrive all at once. I didn't walk out of the mediator's office in Mississauga with a clean understanding of what had happened to my life. I walked out tired and a little numb, carrying a folder of documents that reduced 11 years of a relationship to line items. The understanding came later in pieces, in the phone call with my mother-in-law about this time, in the Instagram story with the balloons, in the moment I looked at the Vancouver job offer and realized I had been waiting for permission that was never going to come. Nobody was going to hand me a fresh start. I had to recognize one when it appeared and have the sense to take it. That's the part I want Liam to understand someday, and my daughter too. Not a lesson I'll sit them down and deliver, just something I hope they absorb from watching how their mother moved through a genuinely difficult few years. That intelligence isn't just about being good at things. It's about reading a situation honestly, even when honesty is uncomfortable. It's about knowing the difference between what you can control and what you can't, and not wasting energy on the wrong category. I couldn't control what my ex-husband's family thought of me or my children. I could control where I took those children next. And then there's the part that doesn't get talked about enough, the sheer stubbornness required to get through something like this without becoming bitter. Bitterness would have been easy. It would have felt justified. But bitterness is a full-time job, and I already had one of those. I chose, slowly and on some days with real effort, to put my energy into the life I was building instead of the one that had fallen apart. That choice, made again and again, not once dramatically but repeatedly in small moments, is what eventually felt like peace. Some mornings, the mountains are still there outside my window. Liam asks about them by name now. My daughter has a best friend 8 blocks away. I didn't need 14 people in a waiting room to confirm my worth, but I'll admit, it's a little satisfying that they found out theirs.